Right, everybody, I make it 9 o'clock, so we're going to, first of all, thank you everybody for coming along this morning, and we're going to kick off with a welcome address from Francesca Cappa, who is the chair of the Young Maritime Professionals, on the screen.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and good morning, and a very warm welcome everyone to this YMP MFB hybrid event on container vessel casualties. I'm delighted to see so many of you attending both in person and online this morning. And first of all, on behalf of the YMP, I would like to thank all the speakers for their time and effort. A large amount of preparation and coordination goes into putting together this event, and I'm very grateful to all of them for their contribution and dedication. Also, a big thank you to MFB solicitors for co-hosting this event with us this morning and sponsoring breakfast for the in-person attendees. In this morning's session, we will be exploring from a very practical perspective how to effectively handle container casualties, crisis management as the situation unfolds, requiring the synergy and collaboration of a range of professionals with very different roles and expertise. Please do be ready with questions for the panel, as searching and challenging as you can manage, as there will be an opportunity to interact with the speakers. And of course, we encourage everyone to participate as much as possible. So without a further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this morning, Kevin Cooper, partner at MFB Solicitors, focusing on casualty work, who has handled a number of large-scale casualty cases, including the fire on board the Amsterdam Bridge and the Atlantic Confidence sinking. I will now hand over to Kevin to explain the format for this morning and introduce our speakers. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Francesca. First thing, remember to put the microphone on. Right, so welcome everybody this morning for turning out so early to join us in this session. The title is Boxing Clever, dealing with container ship casualties. And the aim of the session is to discuss how to improve collaboration in handling container ship casualties of all sizes. Although, of course, many of the comments and issues that arise will be common to the various trades that we in the sector serve. Now, we expect that the young maritime professionals, young maritime professionals, few will have been involved in such an incident. So we've decided to keep the scenario a comparatively straightforward one. This won't be death by PowerPoint. It'll be a scenario involving an imaginary ship, the Boxing Clever, which you can see on the screen in overhead view. Of course, we can see that there are some very much more experienced practitioners in the audience, and we hope also to be able to put forward some points, some opinions that shed light on some new aspects of container ship casualties, even for you that have been in the industry for some time. So as I said, the theme of the session is better collaboration in handling such cases. And in order to be able to collaborate better, we think that it's important that all the stakeholders understand the path ahead, what's likely to happen next in any developing situation, so that they can anticipate what input is needed and can then provide the timely input and information required to achieve the best result for all of the parties who are involved in the maritime adventure. First, to introduce our panelists for this morning, working from my left, moving your right, Captain Amarinder Singh Brar will be sharing with us his technical and claims handling expertise. He served at sea for 17 years, most of which was on container vessels. That involves 6 years of command on large container ships, and he's seen his fair share, as one always does, working within the industry, of cargo damage, fire, crew injury, equipment damage, bunker spills, collisions, even heavy weather damage, and with each incident invariably requiring the necessary follow-up with the owners, managers, and their insurers during the course of his career. After he moved ashore, Amarinder obtained an LLM in maritime law with merit from the University of Southampton. He then served as a nautical surveyor with the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency for 2.5 years, and then worked as a shipping consultant with London Offshore Consultants for nearly 3 years, assisting maritime law firms and P&I clubs in handling shipping disputes. Since he joined MFB in 2021, Amarinder has been involved in numerous wet and dry shipping disputes, including complex salvage and container loss incidents, and his seafaring, regulatory and consultancy experiences provide a unique perspective into shipboard aspects of shipping incidents. Next to Amarinder is Daniel Detter. He's the General Manager Europe of the Salvors Resolve Marine. And of course, he'll be commenting today from the perspective of Salvors. He's been in the salvage industry for over 15 years, working in various capacities at Resolve Marine, including commercial management and business development. The first 5 years of Daniel's career were spent in Resolve's headquarters in Florida. And in 2013, he moved to the UK and now oversees Resolve's London office. He played an active role in the establishment of Resolve's Open 90 and China SPRO divisions and maintains close relationships with many key clients, which include ship owners, the marine insurance industry, of course, oil majors, and various authorities. He sits on the International Salvage Union Salvage Committee and has an MBA from Warwick Business School. Next to Dan is Tim Sherman-Samuels. He's going to provide us with the cargo insurer's perspective, which is, I'd suggest, slightly unusual to have the cargo insurer sitting in an event like this. But of course, as many in the room and online will recognize, they do play an essential part in the handling of cases, particularly during the latter part of the tail of an incident of the type that we're going to discuss. Tim is a marine senior claims adjuster with 18 years experience in the London market, of which the last 3 have been at Chubb. And last but not least, at the far end, my partner, Matt Montgomery, he will speak from the point of view of the owners and the owner's lawyer. Matt advises primarily on contentious matters across wet and dry shipping and has particular expertise in the investigation and handling of disputes arising out of marine casualties, including groundings and salvage cases. A number of the major casualties that he's dealt with in recent years are the Kia Trader, the Frontal Tear, the 1 Apus and the OS 35. And a large number of his cases have been container ship casualties, where he advises on both wet and dry issues arising from containers overboard and stack collapse cases, including general average, the carriage of dangerous goods, and all aspects of vessel sharing arrangements and cross-slot charter parties. And I'm Kevin Cooper, a partner at MFB, doing largely wet cases, as Francesca said, but also I deal with other shipping, insurance, and international trade related work. So there, on the slide, is your panel. Now, as Francesca mentioned, we'd like there to be a good exchange of information and views between the audience and the panelists, and there will be time for questions at the end. We've allowed ourselves an hour and a half. The panel session will take, obviously, the largest part of that, but we do intend to have some time for questions. There are 2 ways for those questions to be put. There will be a roving microphone for those who are in the room at the end of the discussions, but also those of you who are joining us online can use the Q&A tab on your screens to put your questions in as we go along, and then at the end we will put those questions on your behalf. So let's move on to the scenario. The Boxing Clever is a 12,000 TEU fully laden container vessel on its way from the east coast of the United States towards the Straits of Gibraltar for passage through the Suez Canal. And our story starts when she's 100 nautical miles from Gibraltar. Now, it just so happens that Amarinder's identical twin brother is the master of the Boxing Clever, and we're now going to go on board because he has something to report to the office.
Hello? Yes, good evening, sir. This is Master from Boxing Clever. So we have a problem. We have a main engine failure, and chief engineer is investigating, but he suspects we don't have the spares for this issue. He will check, and we should come back to you once his investigations are over. Okay, I will tell him to check for that. Yes, lashings, we did check it today. Weather is, yes, weather is, we are reasonably okay for now, but we have bad weather coming in about 3 hours. I hope he finishes his investigations and he can repair by that time. No, sir, no, we haven't informed any other authority. Yes, I will send the ISM initial report. Yes, we are about 100 miles away from Gibraltar, west of Gibraltar. Okay, I will tell Chief Engineer that. Can you, at your end, start investigating for tow in case the chief is unsuccessful? Okay, sure, sir. Yes, I will send that report, and I will contact you in about 2 hours. Okay, thank you. Bye.
So did everybody in the room manage to hear that? Was that loud enough for you? Good. It's difficult to tell whether it was loud enough from here, but there are lots of zones. Good. So we've had the report from the master of these initial problems. Amarinda, when would that, now moving ashore and speaking with the experience of a captain, when would that initial call have been made?
I'd say within about 5 or 10 minutes, moment chief engineer has had a look at it, because ships are being tracked everywhere. You can't hide a stoppage. It will be recorded. Cargo interests are monitoring the online AIS softwares. Clients sometimes put up zones or alerts for vessels slowing down or straying out of their path. So stoppage is definitely instantly alerted to all parties, whether from ship or directly. So it's better to inform the owners, managers that we have a problem. And in this case, we also need shore assistance.
So, I mean, you mentioned that it's impossible to hide, or the office would be aware of what was taking place. What degree of information would the owners or the managers have about real-time information? Would they have about a vessel's progress on a voyage?
On the bottom of a spectrum, it's just AIS monitoring online. A few managers and owners, they have moved up to Fleet Operations Center. So they are monitoring progress of all the vessels under their charge. And there are master mariners and navigators sitting there. So depending on the software, the alerts set in, any vessel slowing down or deviating is immediately pinged up on the screen. So once the Fleet Operations Center, the FOC, knows about this stoppage, the other parts of the shore ship management are also alerted. Going forward, there are even some ships where they are heavily digitized, in the sense that all equipment is feeding data into a central software, which is then recorded and also being shared ashore with the Fleet Operations Center. So right down to main engine parameters, angle of roll, pitch angle, weather, etc. So this is the other end of the spectrum from just basic AIS data where everything is there. But the common between the two is navigation data, which is speed, course, etc. And that's immediately picked up.
Okay, thanks, Amarinda. So the master has reported to the office, has identified that there might be a need for some assistance. What else is going through the master's head at this stage? What are his priorities? What actions would he be taking?
A master's priority is always safety of life, safety of environment, safety of equipment. But when a voyage starts, it starts with a commercial adventure. But whenever an incident takes place, his priorities change over back to safety of life. My question is my crew safe? Yes, the weather is fine. Safety of environment, it's 100 miles away from Gibraltar, open seas, reasonably open seas. Yes, there is a possibility of drifting to the ground, but It's too far away at this moment, so not really bothered about it. Equipment, cargo, you could see flat calm seas, so not much chance of rolling. We are fine. My only concern at this time is that the chief engineer, who is my best engineer on board, has told me that repairs are difficult. So what's my alternative? My alternative is obtaining a tug. And although I may have the guidance in the safety management system, I don't know whom to contact. So that's why the call ashore towards the end raises a question of highlighting to the office, please investigate the possibility of engaging a tug. That's what I'm thinking at this stage.
Thank you, thank you. So Matt, speaking as on behalf of owners, because lawyers probably won't have been engaged at this stage. So the call has been made by the master, advising of the situation and asking for assistance. What are the next steps for owners or managers?
Well, I agree that the lawyers wouldn't have been appointed at this stage. This is a minor incident at the moment. It's a main engine breakdown, and it may well be capable of repair. So that's what the owners and the shoreside team would be hoping for. But of course, we also have to plan here now for a tow. The master has asked for that, and that's not something that the owner's office would do themselves, in my experience. Instead, they'd be contacting the towage salvage brokers to see if there's a tug available. The other option for the owners here, we know they've traded from the East Coast US, which means they'll need to have an OPA 90 contractor. They'll need to have a relationship with a salvor for the purposes of any emergencies that may occur in US waters pursuant to the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. So it may well be that the owners here already have that close relationship with the salvor. I expect they wouldn't. It may be that that's their approach here to try and find that tug. And here they're checking really whether there are any suitable tugs available in the market. So that is where their inquiries are focused. And the main challenge for them will be seeing if there is that availability of a tug with sufficient bollard pull to assist this vessel if needed. If that tug can be found, then the contractual side should be fairly straightforward. It'd be a tow hire or a tow con contract. They're both pretty straightforward contracts, and really all you're negotiating there is the rate. So that would be the towage side of things. As to the other steps that the owner's office would be taking here, the shoreside team, I think they'd be ensuring that they keep a very close relationship with the ship. They want to know what's going on, and they want to ensure that they're continuing to be updated. So they'd make sure that there's a liaison with the ship at all times. And they may be thinking as well about about notifying their insurers. But I suspect actually at this stage where they may well be able to effect the repairs themselves, that would be a little premature as well. So all in all, nothing too concerning at this stage.
Thanks, Matt. And Dan, so let's assume that you get the call saying that, that the Boxing Clever has a problem, and there's an inquiry as to what assistance you can provide. What are your initial steps? What information do you need, and what sort of contract would you expect to be discussed?
Yeah, so we'd want to know the particulars of the ship, and that's really to determine the size bollard pull that would be required for the tug. We would start to have a look around at what assets are in the area. Now, in this particular situation, it's 100 miles west of Gibraltar, so there should be plenty of resources, I would say, within a few days of the casualty, which is good. There's other instances, if you're in the North Pacific, for instance, where you could be a week away from a tug showing up. So the location does mean quite a bit. The weather, we would be wanting to understand the weather, what kind of towing gear is on board, the potential tug options. And yeah, as Matt alluded to, really in this, these situations happen almost daily for us, and it's usually a BIMCO tow hire, which is just a daily rate. Occasionally you might see a BIMCO tow con, which is a lump sum towage contract.
Thank you, thanks. And Tim, as the cargo insurer, presumably you won't have heard of anything about this by this point.
Potentially not, but we do often receive casualty reports quite early on when there's an issue that gets reported via the maritime press. So we may potentially have heard of this, but as you say, unlikely at this stage.
Okay, well, so we're in a situation now where it looks like there's going to be a tug mobilized and sent out, probably on commercial terms, under a BIMCO tow form. But actually, the situation has developed. We're now going to go back to the bridge of the Boxing Clever.
Hello? Yes, sir. Sir, master of Boxing Clever. Sir, we've lost cargo overboard. We've had stack collapse, bay 56 right aft. We've lost probably half of the stack. There's fire. Yes, there is IMDG over there, 2 boxes. I have checked the DG manifest. Yes, we have. Crew, yes, sir. All crew is safe. The lifeboats are also safe. Yes. So life saving is not affected. No. Repairs? Yes, chief engineer investigated. He called me a couple of minutes ago. He said that we are immobilized. He cannot repair it. He will send a message with the details later. Yes, we did change the AIS status to not under command just after my first call. We were informing everybody on AIS. And I have broadcast a pan message for the lost cargo overboard. All deck lights are on. No, we haven't lost cargo from any other bay. And any update on that tow, sir? We need that urgently. Yep. Okay. No, I can't send the crew out in this bad weather. It would be good if the tug can have that firefighting capability as well. Okay. I'll await your call. Thank you, sir. Bye.
Right, so the situation has got worse. The bad weather has overtaken the vessel. There's been a stack collapse. There's been a fire, and some cargoes have been lost. Some containers rather have been lost overboard. Amarinda, what will be happening and what actions will be being taken on board the ship now?
So there are some things which need to be done on site, and there are some things that you need to inform the office. So on board, there's stack collapse. I can't send out crew. The vessel is rolling. There's fire in that bay with 2 dangerous cargo containers that we know of in that bay. We can't fight it in the middle of the stack. So we would want to just put up a protective spray barrier and try to prevent that fire from going ahead across the cargo to the next cargo bay. The location right aft, you've got spaces below, such as steering gear compartments, which can be accessed internally from the ship. So we would want to go there and have a look and confirm that the fire is not going down into the vessel's hull. On the shore side, there is a requirement, or there's a procedure by which any emergency on board can or must be reported to the vessel's shoreside management. Normally, the person concerned is called the designated person ashore, or DPA. And depending on the safety management system, that duty is often delegated ashore to the vessel's technical manager, because he knows the ship very well. So there's a call right out which says, I have this problem, so that the shoreside management can activate the emergency response and assist the master, take off a bit of workload. They've got access to ship's plan. The superintendent would have had the ship under his charge for about 7 to 8 years. He knows the history of the equipment. He knows the vessel intimately, compared to us seafarers who have been there just for about 4 to 5 months. So getting external help, reducing my workload, keeping my crew safe, trying to keep the situation as it is. The other issue I have is that I don't have engine, so I can't maneuver the vessel in bad weather. Container ships have bow thrusters. Those bow thrusters can't be used for a long time because the motor burns out. They're designed for mooring and unmooring. Let's say half an hour of operation and you are on the borderline, 45 minutes, you're probably going to burn it. 60 minutes operating in bad weather, you will burn that. So that's out of question. The rudder is useless without a water flow around it due to loss of propulsion. Old textbooks talk about lowering the gangway, increasing the drag on one side and changing the drift. You just can't do that on a large vessel, which is about 400 meters long and drawing well over 150,000 tons deadweight. That was possible on small vessels, 100 meters long and 20, 30,000. So there's really nothing you can do over there except ask for a tug, identify the situation, what's going on, give the best information ashore so that they can assist the vessel.
Thank you. I mean, you mentioned looking after the crew. Would you be making any changes to the normal routines in a situation like this?
Yes, I would. The usual working pattern on board is that at any time, 1/3 of the crew are on watch, 1/3 have just gone off watch and they are now resting, and the remaining 1/3 are resting and so that they are ready to come up on watch. So whenever there's an emergency, such as in this case, fire in a particular bay right aft, we would sound the emergency alarm, muster all crew, verify that everyone is safe. Then we would attempt to fight the fire as per the ship's emergency response plan. Once that is settled in, I would want to reduce my resources because no human can work for 24 hours a day for many days. So once the fire is contained, the boundary is set up, I will reduce the resources and start sending people back, start giving them rest and try to manage the situation the best I can. But they will always be available in case the fire flares up and we need to deploy more resources. Just making the best of the situation that we can.
Thank you. And with loss of containers and a stack collapse, are there stability issues potentially for the vessel?
There would be, but on such large vessels, they have a lot of reserve stability with them. So one stack, removing the complete weight of one stack wouldn't make much changes when you do it right aft. When you do it right middle, yes, other stresses come into play. Removing it right aft, it's just a change of trim. So no, it wouldn't affect stability or the hull integrity.
Thank you. So Matt, now sort of shifting over to owners and also to some extent with your lawyer's hat on as well in terms of the advice that you give to them. You've now been updated with the considerably worse situation than there was during the last report. How would owners and how would you advise them to act?
Well, the situation's now obviously changed very significantly with container losses, the main engine still not responding, stack collapse and a fire. So on the shore side now, and I speak now from the owner's office, if I can, having never worked in an owner's office, but having seen this from the outside, this is now a major incident and one that would require a serious response. And this would therefore be something that should be written into the owner's safety management system pursuant to their emergency response procedures in the ISM code. So there should be a plan in place for this very situation. And this plan would require an overall coordinator. So someone will have taken charge of this immediately. And then there will be clear roles and responsibilities within the shoreside team at owner's office. So this should all be set out already. One of the priorities here is to ensure that one person has a line through to the ship at all times. So that individual is only tasked with liaising with the ship and ensuring that if the ship is reporting, they are picking up those messages from the ship. We'll also have somebody else who in the team, I would suggest, who would need to now notify hull and machinery and P&I insurers. There's no doubt now that the insurance lines are going to want to know about this incident. I don't want to play an active role in that. And lawyers would now be instructed as well. That may well also be written into the plan. But these are all steps that are taking place within, I'd say, a few hours of this report coming through. And these are all steps which, as I say, ideally are written into a careful emergency response procedures manual where everybody knows what they're doing. Now, it depends what kind of casualty you're dealing with, but something of this sort may well start to attract media attention as well. It's amazing how fast some of the websites, such as the Salvage and Wreck Instagram feed or other websites, are reporting on these casualties. As soon as they've picked up on an NUC call from a vessel, they are then putting online messages out, and stories are starting to come in. And then that's very quickly picked up by other interests as well. And so you may need to manage that. It may well be that someone on the owner's team also needs to be monitoring the media exposure and deciding whether media consultants are needed. And in my experience there, if there is any risk of this story starting to come out, then you want to take charge of the story. So you want to ensure that your media consultants are there controlling the narrative and giving something to the media rather than leaving them to go off finding the story themselves. So owner's office is very busy at the moment, but ideally everybody knows their task and are putting their roles into good effect.
And so now we're now looking at moving away from the tow hire or tow-con type contract towards another form of contract. Dan, what sort of contracts, in light of the new information and the new developments, are we looking at now?
So, yeah, I think there would be two types of contract under consideration. One would be a BIMCO rec hire, and the other would be obviously a Lloyd's open form. And, you know, basis past experiences with container ship firefighting, it always starts as a small fire, and then the calls subsequently come, and usually it does escalate. So, but a lot will depend on the owner. A lot will depend on their hull underwriters. A lot will depend on their P&I club as well. So you get different responses depending on who the owner and their underwriters are. So,
well, at this stage, we've obviously got a developing situation, but it seems that that it's likely that the vessel will be capable of being salved. So, would salvors be looking for a loft in this particular case?
Yeah, I mean, it's a contract that doesn't require lots of negotiation. That's the beauty of it, and that you can go right away and avoid that. And on fire cases, yeah, sometimes days can be quite important. So yeah, I think it would be, you know, Lloyd's open form with Scopic incorporated, whether you invoke it or not. I think we'll get to that. But, you know, there will be some big container lines that will not even entertain a Lloyd's open form. That's just a fact. So, but yeah, I think on an escalating fire cargo loss, it's a pretty, seems like a logical next step.
And Matt, what would your advice, do you think, be to those container lines that would not accept a loft in the circumstances of this case?
Well, I mean, if I put myself in the shoes of the master and the crew here, if I can go from that perspective, I'd want to know that everything is now being thrown at this. I'd want to know that there is a best endeavors contract and that a professional salvor is now doing everything they can to mobilize assets and resources to get out to the ship, put the fire out, and help us bring the vessel in. That would be how I'd be looking at it from the crew side. If I was told that actually there was a contract being negotiated and terms were trying to be agreed and security needed to be put up and there were disputes over some particular aspect of the payment provisions or the like, I think I'd be pretty disappointed as that master. So looking at it from the crew side, that would be my perspective. I think from the lawyer's side here, and starting from the owner's position, I mean, one can be instructed by the owners in the P&I or the owners in hull, or indeed all parties at once at the outset of a case like this. I would be encouraging any client here to enter into an LOF contract. You know, I would want to see a contract agreed quickly. I'd want to see a professional salvor on the move. I don't think this is the kind of situation where one can start negotiating. There are cases where a rec hire responds very well to situations. This isn't it. So I'd say the no cure, no pay LOF contract with best endeavors and no concerns. Also, you know, the other big advantage of the LOF is we haven't got to talk about security now. Security is only going to follow when the salvage services have been completed with success. So we don't have to talk about any of those aspects. So that's what I'd be saying. The owners, if I was talking to Dan, I'd be saying a clean LOF is surely the best contract to be pushing for here. And indeed, if contacted by a cargo underwriter, which would be unlikely at this stage, I'd be saying the same thing again. We've all got the same interests here, as I see it, on the owner's side, on the property side, which is to ensure that we maximise the prospects of salving ship and cargo without any losses. So that's how I'd be approaching this from the lawyer with the lawyer's hat on. I mean, if you were on owners, so the only other thing I'd be thinking of as well is perhaps retaining an expert. You're going to need an expert for this case, so I'd be starting to think about the expert team, and then following on from that, with containers in the water, if you're acting for owners in the club, I'd be thinking about some form of drift analysis. We don't know quite where those containers are going to end up. They could well be hazards to shipping. It's going to be hard right now to identify where they're going. We're going to be working on forecast data, and it's likely that to get any accurate assessment of where those containers are going to be drifting, we're going to need hindcast data as well. But I'd still be asking the questions of the consultants so we can start getting some idea. We may well be contacted by coastal states who are concerned about this incident, and we want to, as the P&I club, to be able to give them the reassurance in that regard.
Thank you. Tim, over to you, just on the contract. Two possible forms of contract have been discussed there, and probably you're not yet aware, nor in being invited, and may well not be invited to express any opinion on what contract should be entered into. But what's the general view of the cargo insurance market regarding masters entering into or owners entering into Lloyd's open forms?
From the cargo market perspective, we're generally more happier with an LOF being agreed because it provides some certainty surrounding the negotiation about the salvage services that have been rendered. We know that any dispute will go to the London Salvage Arbitration Board. So from our perspective, yes, we would prefer it to go to an LOF.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's assume in this case it is a Lloyd's open form. Dan, what are the next practical steps that you're taking in order to discharge your best endeavours obligation to salve the vessel?
Yeah, so I guess it would depend on the timing. If now, the tugs having firefighting capability is obviously paramount. There's varying levels of that. And, we'd be doing some, where are the resources and weighing whether to send specialized firefighting teams on board one of the tugs, and maybe that multiple tugs are going to be going out. And are there going to be any external, portable firefighting systems that will join the tugs? Standard kit that we would normally bring. There's sort of some new technology that's come out called, it's called a hydropen. And it's actually like a system. You can carry it in a suitcase. You can carry it on board a flight. And it's essentially clips onto a hose, and it uses the pressure from the water to actually pierce into the containers if you're trying to do some very localized firefighting. So you can carry these on board. You'll want to have infrared cameras for firefighting at nighttime to be able to see. It's actually quite helpful to be able to see the hot spots and so forth. Drones are also things that we would want to bring that can also have a look around. We're also going to be looking at having a chemist with us for when we can get on board. The vessel plans, so emergency towing booklet, fire control plan, dangerous goods manifest, cargo manifest, these sorts of things are useful for us. And then, as the tug is responding, we would also be trying to provide some remote support as well to the crew and to the master. On this instance, I guess the vessel doesn't have any power, but if the vessel did have power, then you're looking at the wind direction and the location of the fire, because you don't want to be, the wind pulling flames back towards sound cargo. So that's something we would be looking at to advise accordingly. And of course, yeah, the weather as well. These are the sort of initial things that would be going through our head.
You mentioned some documentation. I mean, in your experience, do owners tend to come through with the necessary documentation for salvors to plan their assistance quickly enough?
It's a lot of times some of this information can be difficult to get your hands on right away. Dangerous goods manifest, maybe not so much, but so yeah, but you get a bit more challenge if there's stability issues, because although this, as Amrinder said, it's not a major concern at the moment, but if you have vessel groundings and so forth, then we want kind of detailed plans, lines plans, and some detailed that can be considered proprietary information, so our naval architects can start modeling the vessel. That can take days sometimes to get our hands on. So, but I wouldn't be overly concerned. And also there we have some time right now, because with the fire, it may be severe enough that we're not going to be putting people on board yet. We'll just be doing firefighting from the tugs. And as Amrinder alluded to, kind of creating these water curtains, boundary cooling measures as a first step until you can get, people on board. And of course, if the weather's poor, it's also a challenge to get the teams on board. So once again, working very closely with the crew to advise remotely until we can get on board.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to the next stage of any such event. As I mentioned before, let's say that a Lloyd's open form has been concluded. We might come back to SCOPIC at a later stage if time allows, but moving on, the fire's been extinguished and the vessel is successfully towed to Algeciras, where it anchors. As we know, containers have been lost and there's been a stack collapse, something like what's on the screen at the moment. Matt, we've got these collapsed containers which will need to be removed before the vessel can be sent for repairs and continue trading. What options would owners consider for the removal of those containers?
So we're on the LOF contract at the moment. So the question is, when do we come off the LOF contract, and is there a need to do so? If we're in a safe condition and a safe place, then the LOF contract can be brought to an end. And indeed, there's an argument that it should be brought to an end. We've got a challenge here if the stack collapses, is as you can see on the slide. That's going to take quite some time. And it's likely, in my experience, that the terminal here in Algeciras is not going to want to use its gantry cranes for that container removal. It can obviously be a more complex procedure than a standard container discharge operation. We may need some additional lashings. We may need some additional support for these containers as they're being taken off the ship. So if we're looking at a situation like this one, I suspect that we'd now be talking as the owners and their hull insurers to the salvors to try and establish whether there is another contract that could be entered into here. And here it may well be that the wreck hire contract, something along those lines, is something sensible to enter into. The services under that contract would be the safe removal of the containers ashore. And this could take some time. It may well involve another crane needing to be brought in, some kind of crawler crane. In my experience, it may even require a barge alongside, so floating assets being brought in by the salvors as well. But negotiating this under a new contract, under a wreck hire contract, shouldn't be too complex. Again, the wreck hire contract, like the tow contracts, is fairly straightforward, and so can be negotiated fairly quickly. It's well known by the salvors, it's well understood by the market. So that contract can be put in place pretty quickly, and I don't think it's going to be to the detriment of anyone here, because we're moving away from best endeavors that may well benefit the salvors, who'll be quite happy to come off that very onerous obligation. Equally, the discharge operation is probably going to proceed at around, still proceed at a good pace with these salvage assets being brought in. So that's what I think here would be the situation in terms of the contracting side, probably moving off LOF and onto some form of rec hire. Now, if you had, what would change that? I suppose what would change that is if you only had a few containers that were coming off, if it was a much smaller collapse and they could be brought off under the LOF, then it may be easier to do so there rather than negotiating a new contract. Equally, if there's a fire still burning on board, then I don't think the ship would be considered to be in a safe condition. And so therefore, I think you'd want to make sure that fire was out before the ship and cargo was redelivered.
I don't know if I should back up once, because when you asked me about the responding, I was speaking from, say, a technical perspective on what we're thinking as far as the actual firefighting efforts. Now, there is obviously a contractual discussion that's ongoing as well. We've agreed to Lloyd's open form. Scopic would be incorporated, and now the decision that we'll have to be discussing internally is whether we invoke Scopic. And so on a high level, essentially, Lloyd's open form is best endeavors. Some of the benefits of it is, you're not doing these contractual discussions. We can focus on the response and then deal with the kind of the financial side later. So we would be looking at, so we know, going back to before the LOFs agreed, we'd be looking at the values, the age of the ship, the type of cargo on board, how many boxes are on board, et cetera. And then how it essentially works is that you're remunerated on the value you salve. So you would come to, the value of the ship, the value of the cargo. I know numbers that typically get thrown around with container cases are 30,000 a box. There's 10,000 or how many on board here. So you can quickly do the numbers and realize that this could be quite a large salvage fund, depending on how much damage has occurred, because that would obviously be subtracted. So there is a risk reward here in the sense that we could go out under a straight Lloyd's open form and render the services and put the fire out, and you have a considerably large funds. On the reverse side, you could also have an issue where a lot of money is spent and the fire escalates, and as the case we were talking about in the Arabian Sea, the vessel sinks, and then all of a sudden you get no money whatsoever for the efforts. And so that brings in the decision making around Scopic, which is essentially a safety net. So say, for the purposes of this discussion, the salvage fund was $100 million. And this is subtracting the damage, and you take into account how much money you've spent from your out of pockets, how much did the tugs cost, et cetera, because you have to fund that. The salver has to fund all of that under a straight Lloyd's open form. And then you come to discussion about, we believe we deserve $5 million for our efforts. Now, if we were to invoke Scopic, then essentially it gives us the comfort levels that we are going to be remunerated, even if the vessel does sink. There's tariffs that are laid out, so we're comfortable that we will get compensated for our efforts. And say there is an Article 13 award still after the services, then we would take a 25% penalty on the award. So I think for the purposes of this case and from past experience, we would probably invoke Scopic. It would depend on the information we're getting. Sometimes it's quite limited, but if you see photos of flames going up, then it makes the decision a bit easier. The other alternative is you can respond under a straight LOF, and then you may get out there and realize the situation is escalating, and you can invoke Scopic at that point, but you would lose all of the remuneration up until that point. So your Scopic sheet and your tariff rates wouldn't start until that period in which you invoked it. So that's another option.
And yes, and it's cases like this really show what a sort of a financial gamble to some extent Scopic offers, although and it will depend upon the appetite of risk of the salvor as to whether they decide to invoke it or not. Just on the issue of the removal of the containers, what sort of input in your experience the harbour authorities tend to have, Dan, in the termination of LOF and whether they'd want, for example, all the containers to be off under LOF before it was they were happy with it being terminated.
Sure. I don't recall any instances where their concern is as much the contractual side of discharging the damaged containers is much more about the fire. Is it out? Because we see lots of instances where the fire may be out for hours, a day at a time, and all of a sudden you have reflashing and so forth. So I think the authorities' main concern would be the comfort level that the fire is officially out. And then, you know, you're probably at anchor, and then you need to decide how you're going to get these containers off and whether you can use shoreside cranes. Is there berthing space, et cetera. So I don't think they would be too concerned about the contractual side. It would be more though, but they wouldn't want a Lloyd's open forum to be terminated when there's fires reoccurring and things like that. So they would probably send a surveyor and some of their people on board as well to look at it.
Okay, thank you. So that's really dealt with the sort of the physical elements of the salvage operation, but the next question to which many people's minds turn is that of security. Salvors, of course, have a lien on the salved property and so have a salvage lien. Owners potentially have a lien for general average, GA. Matt, the inevitable question would be asked, would owners declare GA in a case like this?
Yeah, and it's a very difficult question to answer. I think my starting point here, perhaps a little controversially, my starting point would be to try and do everything possible to avoid the declaration of GA in a container ship casualty, because of the administrative burden that is going to come with collecting securities from the cargo interests involved. It's never an easy decision, but I think it is important to explore every other avenue. And what I'm thinking here is any potential GA absorption clause in a hull policy. So is there an absorption clause there which may provide a fairly significant figure? I understand up to 3, 4, 5 million is now seen in the market in order to cover those GA losses. And what are the GA losses? I mean, there's an initial question, and I've hurdled that slightly because we're working on the basis here that there is sufficient expenditure or sacrifice to justify declaring GA in the first place. So let's say we've overcome that. We're then looking at the GA absorption clause. I think we should also be looking at the contracts between the various carrying parties. It may well be that the lines have agreed between themselves that GA is not to be declared, and I've seen clauses to that effect in contracts as well. So one's trying to weigh up all of these things to decide whether or not GA should be declared in these circumstances, but have no illusions that if GA is declared and the collection of securities begins, that's a general average bond and a general average guarantee from each of those 12,000 containers on board, or slightly less as we've lost a few. Those containers are going to have to be held in Algeciras in the port, within the port limits, under the salvors lien, but now the owner's GA lien as well, until those securities are provided. That's going to take a long time, could be many months, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and someone's going to have to pay for that. And many of these boxes are likely to be uninsured, so we may not get any bond or guarantee. Others, we may get cash deposits, but they're going to have to be held by adjusters. So there's a temptation, I think, whenever there's a salvage, to say, well, we're collecting salvage securities, so let's collect GA securities as well. And that may well be the right answer, but I think it just needs to be very carefully explored before committing to it.
I think you've also answered the question of how salvors would collect their security, which would be to appoint an adjuster, I suppose, whether or not GA has been declared in a box ship casualty like this, where there are lots of cargo interests. I'll just inject a comment here where there was a box ship casualty and a Lloyd's open form salvage, and general average wasn't declared, but salvage security was required. And this took place during the really hot period in the container ship market, a year or so ago. Of course, the market's abated since then. But the vessel arrived at her port of refuge, but unusually there was no room ashore for the salvors to store the containers while security was being obtained under their lien. The only space available actually was the slots that had been booked for those containers by the lines. Eventually, it was agreed that the lines would take custody of the containers until the security had been provided under a specific discharge and storage agreement, which set out the rules for the storage, the costs that would be involved, and so on and so forth. And when the arbitration award was issued late last year, the arbitrator commented that the parties had shown good cooperation in dealing with what was an almost unprecedented situation where the salvors were unable to deal with the collection of security themselves. And importantly for, in that case, the shipping lines, the costs incurred by the lines in storing and dealing with those containers were treated as being costs incurred by the salvors themselves in the same way as they incur the cost, for example, of the adjusters. So those were recoverable by the lines in the arbitration, where, of course, the cost was averaged amongst the South parties. So we're not in the kind of market where that sort of situation is likely to arise at the moment, but it may do in the future. Amarinder, what sort of evidence would be starting to be collected now that the situation has stabilised on behalf of the owners?
There are some things that you can start to collect remotely, digital data, etc., weather reports. So we can start collecting that. There's a standard checklist which most of the firms have in-house. So we would start tweaking that to the particular incident and start picking up records that we want to pick up later. Some of the shipboard records are straightforward plans, certificates, etc., which are often held in duplicate ashore at the manager's office, so we can get that relatively quickly, straight away. Some of the shipboard records, we would have to go there physically and collect it. There are some digital data which is present on board the vessel, which needs to be physically extracted from the vessel. So these are the kind of records that we are looking. Everything that we can pick up ashore, we will pick it up here, and we'll try to minimize the amount of data and records that we want to pick up from the vessel.
Thank you. Matt, would you add anything in terms of the position of the owners and their insurer's lawyer for evidence collection at this stage?
I think just to say there are probably three broad categories of evidence you're collecting here. Witness evidence, and so you'd want to be sending someone as soon as possible to get on board the ship. Memories fade, and you want to get the story as quickly as possible. And in our experience, even over the last few years, where we've all become so much better at dealing with things remotely, there is no substitute to getting on the ship or sending an investigator on the ship and collecting that evidence. So it'd be sending a master mariner. For us, that would be Amarinder in a container case with his container vessel experience. It would be vessel documents, which Amarinder has already collected, and then it would be any physical evidence as well. So here, it may be necessary to collect some of the lashings, the damaged lashings, to investigate whether they played any role at all in the casualty. That would be very much led by the expert team, the experts who have already been consulted early on, who would be attending at the same time, I would suggest.
Thank you. And Tim, we've been kind of waiting for the bit where you're likely to become involved, and I think we're pretty much here now. It seems that if you haven't, through your normal sources, which would be claims handling or cargo claims handling firms, and also other claims handling organizations, you will become aware of the incident when you're asked to put up security on behalf of your insureds. So what are your next steps at this stage? What's going through your mind, and what actions will you be taking?
At this stage, we'd initially want to be gauging what our likely exposure is across our global network of offices. We have 25 offices around the world globally. this voyage was from the US to Europe, so I'd imagine that most of our interest would be cargoes exporting out of the US or being imported into Europe. So I'd initially reach out in my role as a casualty coordinator to the US office and our European offices, asking those offices if they can advise all of their claims adjusters about this casualty, and letting us know in London if they have any exposures, creating a central database for all of those exposures to be recorded on. And at that point, once we have a better idea as to the exposure across our group, we would be looking to instruct a legal representative to act for all of our interests. And once we'd instructed that representative, they would, in turn, as Matt described, would instruct their own master mariner as their representative and surveyors to go on board the vessel to gather in evidence to support our interests. At the same time, we would be receiving the salvage guarantees and potentially GA guarantee documents. And before completing those documents, we would review the wordings of those to ensure that our interests were properly protected. Sometimes when they come through from average adjusters, the wording isn't quite watertight in our experience, so we try and negotiate that directly with the average adjusters. Sometimes we then use our legal representatives that we've already instructed them to negotiate that on our behalf. And once we're satisfied that that's in place, we'll then complete those securities. Generally, each Chubb office will deal with those independently unless, for whatever reason, they need to be completed in London. Sometimes the security is only satisfactory if it's completed by Chubb in London, in our case. The other thing we would consider is, depending on the size of the casualty, we may consider seeking a P&I club letter of undertaking security from the vessel whilst the vessel is still in port, in order to protect our interests later on against owners, in case we wish to issue claims in tort against owners.
Very good. Thank you. Well, we'll come on to that claim against owners in due course. But Matt, we're now in Algeciras, and as Tim mentioned, there'll be experts being appointed on behalf of various parties, not just cargo interests. Potentially, how do owners manage all of the requests for access to the vessel at this stage?
Yeah, and this is obviously a challenge in a case of this sort. There are going to be a large number of surveyors wanting access to the vessel. I think that the starting point, if your owner's solicitor, is to make sure that everything is safe and secure. You'd want to complete your own investigations first before allowing others on board. When others do come on board, you'd want to make sure the clear terms for that access are agreed. For example, an absolute sort of no at this stage would be talking to the crew. But one would seek to try and coordinate those attendances of the various cargo interests on board to minimise any risk to the vessel crew, and indeed those attending on board, who would have to provide an indemnity as well. That's the other thing I'd add here. There's a very helpful ASG indemnity for the attending surveyors. So yeah, no huge complexity here, but just needs to be sort of carefully managed and streamlined.
Thank you. Okay, well, the last phase of dealing with this casualty that we wanted to discuss was the aftermath, dealing with the aftermath. The damaged containers have been removed, the vessel is on its way either for repairs or immediately back to trading, depending on whether it's been possible to repair the engine. And of course, we've got a number of legal proceedings that'll then follow. And Tim, to you first, we've got obviously lost containers here, damaged containers from the stack collapse, and cargo interests will be required to contribute to the salvage reward. What will they have in mind regarding the circumstances of the case as far as recovering their losses is concerned?
So we'll have PA losses undoubtedly for the containers that have gone overboard, providing we have insured cargoes in those containers. And then we'll have the salvage indemnity claims for the salvaged amounts that we put for, paid or provided security for. Our legal representatives will generally pursue those claims on our behalf against owners and against the contractual carriers under the various bills of lading and seaway bills. The carriers under those bills of lading and seaway bills will generally have contracted under the Hague-Visby rules, and we will be pursuing those on the basis of potential unseaworthiness of the vessel at the commencement of the voyage. As I mentioned earlier, we also have claims in tort against owners.
Thank you. So that's one possible line of dispute, cargo interests pursuing their own claims. And of course, you mentioned there the salvage indemnity. Dan, how does the LOF arbitration proceedings tend to move forward once the dust has settled, and what are the ways in which the parties can cooperate in making that process as painless as possible?
Yes. So once the salvage security is in place, then I think there'll be a really discussion on going to come to the Article 13 award. Now, in this instance, we did invoke Scopic, so we will be subject to a 25% penalty on the award. But I think it's about, we have to take into consideration the repair costs and the various cargo interests. So it's these, particularly in container cases, these process doesn't happen overly quickly, unfortunately, and that's one of the things with Lloyd's open forums as well, is that from a salvage perspective, a lot of the market thinks that it is maybe it's more favorable to the salver, but what some people don't realize is that the time it takes to actually collect the money can be years after the services were rendered that you actually get remunerated. So for us, it's about trying to get all the information together, and I don't think it can be too contentious at this stage. I think it's the facts are there. There isn't too much. The exciting bits of the actual services and the firefighting is over, and it's a bit more with getting our legal teams involved and also having these open discussions, getting around the table, I think, with cargo interests, with Hull, with the owners, and the representatives to move it along, because we obviously have quite an incentive to move it along, because we'll be out of pocket during this time, and this could be millions of dollars, which is a significant amount of money for a salvor.
Thank you. I mean, in your experience with a casualty of this size, with the number of parties involved, is it likely to be possible to settle it, or is it almost inevitable that the case will go before an arbitrator?
I don't. Speaking from our experience and Resolve's experience, we haven't. We prefer to avoid that avenue if at all possible. I can't think of many cases where we've actually gone to arbitration. So we work on a global basis. We oftentimes see these parties again and again, Hull underwriters, clubs, etc. So for us, I think it's in our best interest to settle amicably and keep in mind our future business operations. Now there are instances where maybe we feel that we're being taken to the cleaners or something like that. So occasionally we need to put our foot down, but I think for the most part for us, it's about trying to settle amicably, and arbitration it is there as a safety net for everyone involved. And that's also part of the benefit of it, is that if we can't agree, then all the chips can be laid down, and we have an arbitrator who can come, and sometimes it's in our favor, sometimes it's not. It really depends.
Thank you. So we've mentioned the LOF arbitration. We've mentioned the possible cargo indemnity claims or damage claims Matt, can you just paint us a picture of the likely disputes or issues that there were going to be between the various parties in a scenario such as this, and how they interrelate?
Yeah, well, as Dan says, the exciting work's over now. So this is where it comes to the lawyers, I'm afraid. So here, yeah, I think there are various stages. We've got the LOF arbitration. Dan's already touched on that. That will take some time. Realistically, in my experience, you'll be waiting until the end of the LOF arbitration or until settlements are concluded before you still see the cargo claims start to come through the line, because the cargo claimants want to see what their liability is. So they'll wait till their exposure is crystallized, and then those claims will be brought. So you'll see cargo claims generally being brought under the transport documents. There'll be a huge array of different transport documents here with various different lines and VLCCs involved in this as well. So the different carriers involved, and there'll be different liner bills depending on which claimant you are in this situation. So you've got those contractual claims being pursued. You then may well have claims being pursued directly against the owners, as Tim mentioned. The owners there would have the option of then defending those claims on the basis of clauses within the bills. So they're entitled to the defences within the bills, generally pursuant to a Himalaya clause, and the bill is likely to contain, doesn't always, but is likely to contain some covenant not to sue, where the cargo owner has promised that they will not bring a direct claim against any other party. They'll only bring a claim against their carrier. So if you're the owner, you're looking out for those clauses to see if that can assist you. And these cargo claims will track through. Here we've got cargo that's been loaded in the US on the East Coast, so I suspect we're going to find US COGSA playing a role, and therefore US lawyers. We're then going to find that once those claims have been dealt with, so once they've been, if settlements have been entered into or liabilities have been identified, then those claims will move up the line. So they're now moving up the charter chain, and that claim will now be brought against the carrying interests up the line, and ultimately through to the owners as well, with then the charter party litigation sort of at the end of all this to determine where exactly that bucket of losses, the overboard containers, the damaged containers, and the salvage indemnity claims as well, where that should sit as between the different parties at the top of the chain.
What about the vessel sharing agreements between the various lines? So typically you'll have one of the lines that acts as that charters the vessel or owns the vessel, and then they have a number of agreements with the other lines to share slots. Specifically, does that tend to have a significant impact on the way that cases are handled?
Not initially, because all of those lines will be defending those cargo claims under their own transport documents. But then of those various lines, one under this vessel sharing agreement will be deemed the sort of operator, the quasi-owner, who will, for legal purposes, sit above everyone else. And those claims will therefore be filtered through from the other partner lines. So that's the sort of route of travel of the cargo claims. If you've got one of these vessel sharing agreements, that one of the lines will have been identified as the effective owner, albeit they're likely to then be bringing their own claims up the line against another time charter or straight through to a disposal owner.
Thank you. There's just one thing that I wanted to talk about, and indeed that's reflected by one of the questions that's come in online from Roy CHR, who said early on, under duress, a master has the option of making an all-ship call to the nearest MRCC, Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre, requesting tug assistance and to take any available tugs in the vicinity under Lloyd's open form contract. And I think, Amarinda, this is something of a theme recently, the degree to which the autonomy of the master in making decisions as to the safety of the vessel, including engaging salvage services, has been eroded. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, this was an amendment to the SOLAS Convention in Chapter 5, which basically says that any decision that a master wishes to take in his professional judgment cannot be overridden by owner, charterer, operator, manager of the vessel. So the gentleman is absolutely right about it. But on a global scale, such resources are not available to the master. For example, these resources are easily available in Europe or North America. We would not find these in the middle of the Pacific Oceans with island states. So for me, at that point, I want to offload my mental burden to the shore office and let them sort out the best location for a tug for me. If it eventually comes from these entities, fine, so be it. But my focus at that time is holding the situation, not letting it escalate. And all these ancillary things can be done by the shore side who have better resources. So those are my views. Yes, it's possible, but there's no global coverage of these resources.
And is it generally considered that that it's possible for the office to have as good an appreciation of the particular dangers being experienced by the vessel as the master on the scene? Do you think that commercial issues can sometimes override safety issues?
They, in my opinion, I think they used to do so in the past, not anymore, because we've seen in litigation a lot of documents, etc. They come through, they are shared, they're disclosed. So these calls are always scrutinized later on. I don't think that's an issue anymore.
Thank you. And really, my last question was just a very brief question to everybody on the panel. Can you name one thing that would help to improve the communication and collaboration between the various stakeholders involved in a case like this? Matt, can I start at your end?
Yeah, I think it sort of comes back to the theme of this talk, really, which is just collaboration and preparedness. I think it's everyone understanding what's going to come next and how this is all going to play out, and particularly in those early stages. And so where the owners understand that when an incident like this occurs, the steps that need to be taken, those early stages, and I say this both from the safety management perspective, but also from the legal side, you know, those early stages are critical in terms of evidence preservation, in terms of sharing documents with other parties, ensuring that every effort can be made to mitigate losses. So I think, you know, where you've got these very complex incidents which can last for many, many years, I think it's making sure that the stakeholders understand in those very early stages, particularly the owners, what needs to be done and what needs to be shared.
Thank you. Tim?
I would echo Matt's comments there. From a cargo perspective, I feel that it would be useful if cargo interests could be warned a bit earlier than when they receive the security request. I think given the modern technology we have these days, there could be a means of notifying all cargo on board at an earlier stage when there's an earlier stage of the casualty, so that their insurers can be better prepared to provide the security more quickly, and they can also consider the appointment of experts and legal representatives at an earlier stage as well.
Dan?
I would say, you alluded to the initial stages. I think, yeah, it's important to over-prepare in issues like this. So it's easier to scale down oftentimes than it is to ramp up a response. So if it's not a Lloyd's open forum where we're on best endeavors and we're going to send what we think is appropriate, but in other cases like wreck hires where, you know, we may start out as a tug and then it goes to 2 tugs and 3 tugs, and then you need salvage teams, etc. I think, you know, trying to be realistic and yeah, not reactive in casualties is important. And then, you know, as the casualty is ongoing, I think, yeah, being able to sit around with the various stakeholders and have discussions, even if it's, you know, during the response or after the response as well. Of course, there's a need for legal advice, etc. But we do see a lot of incidents where it may be because the claims handler doesn't have experience, which is fair enough. just like I wouldn't have experience in a lot of the day-to-day claims management, but sometimes it's easy to to have maybe too many lawyers involved at sometimes. So as a practical, from a practical side, I think it's just important that you have the open lines of communication, be able to pick up the phone when needed to solve through what it will inevitably be lots of problems during a case of this stature, and to work through them. Thank you. Amarinder?
Yeah, I'd say open and prompt communication, both to and from the vessel between all parties. Sharing information is the key in managing the crisis initially. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. We now have some time for some questions, and we have a roving microphone available if anybody in the room has any questions or comments that they'd like to raise. Kirsten is here, ready to go. Please raise your hand if you wanted to raise either a question or a comment. I'm just going to kick off with one that's come in online from Ritesh, who said, though the salvors have been engaged, however, still the efforts of the crew members have been found to be substantial in fighting the fire and preventing the fire from spreading to accommodation, engine room, etc., thereby contributing to substantially saving life and property. Matt, by the way, this is coming your way, so you can start thinking about a possible response. What rights would the onboard crew members have to claim their award for salving the vessel from perils? Whom do they approach initially? Are they entitled to exercise their lien on the vessel once in the nearest port for repairs, etc., and thus may prevent it from sailing further? Do you have an answer on that one?
Well, that is not a question I've been asked before, so that is definitely a difficult question. I've never seen that, I have to say, the crew themselves trying to pursue a salvage award in a situation like that. I'd be surprised if their crew contracts, I defer to Amarinder on this, but I'd be surprised if the crew contracts would allow that situation to be one that was in any way realistic, I have to say. The way that the crew efforts will be recognized would be within the course of the LOF arbitration. And that would be a slight down push on the arbitration award, where the arbitrator would take into account those efforts made by the crew, both before and during the time that the salvors were attending the vessel. So that's where it would be factored in within the LOF arbitration. But I don't think it would be any separate claim on behalf of the crew members. If it is, then I've got something to learn for sure.
I think the larger concern would be potentially the tug, the crew on board the tug that was maybe doing the initial firefighting would be the party that might be most interested, actually. But typically in BIMCO contracts, etc., there's a no claim for salvage clause, which is included in the contract to avoid those sorts of issues. I know there is some debate when it comes to U.S. flagged tugs and U.S. crewed vessels that there may be a right, regardless of this no claim for salvage clause, to try to claim. But it hasn't been an issue for us, and we charter lots of U.S. flagged tugs. We own U.S. flagged tugs. But I think it probably deserves a little bit of attention, because I've heard lots of rumors, and even some of our competitors may be trying to whisper in the ear of our clients that we might be interested in something like that. But it does warrant maybe a look into, particularly on the U.S. side, because I think there's an actual legal right to claim if you're on board a tug.
And I've not really looked specifically at this question, but I think Matt's instinct is right. I think generally, in order to be able to claim salvage, you have to be a volunteer, and I think under their existing contracts with the ship owner, the crew would not have an independent right of claim for salvage. They may do if they provided salvage services to another vessel. That again, that would depend on contracts, but I think so far as the crew of the vessel is concerned, it's their responsibility to do what they can to save the vessel. Richard.
I've got a comment and a question. So the comment relates to tort actions, which Tim brought up, and specifically to tort actions, not where the cargo has been damaged, but where you're claiming for an indemnity in respect of your liability to the salvors. And the comment is that whereas previously you might have thought that you would actually need physical damage in order to get your tort claim off the ground for an indemnity for salvage liability. There was an interesting case earlier this year. TIR decided it, and he referred to an Australian decision called the Ikan Jahan, and that suggests that there is the ability to bring a claim in tort, not where there's any physical damage, but where there's a liability to salvors. So Ikan Jahan, take a look at it, that's the comment. And the question is, to Matt, just as regards taking the salvage liens, or rather salvage security and relinquishment of the lien, when might you not take a general average bond or guarantee at the same time? Why would you go for a salvage bond or guarantee but leave out general average?
Yeah, and I take your point, Richard. If you're collecting the salvage securities, why not simply do so at that point in time? And I think that is the counter argument here to all the reasons why I think GA could be very difficult in terms of the administration effect. If here you've got a salvage as we have, and the salvage securities are being collected, then why not add that extra layer in? I think that is the reason for doing so. Whether you then pursue that GA claim later on, you can leave that over for the time being, and it may well be that that's the decisive factor in a salvage case. That means you do collect those securities. Yeah.
Yeah, just following up on that. I wonder whether you can exercise a GA lien if you're in a port of refuge. You've got the obligation under the bill of lading to prosecute the voyage with reasonable dispatch, and normally GA securities are demanded at the end of the voyage. So you may have difficulty. It may be convenient to do it all in one go, but it may not be. Well, it may throw up legal issues, the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah, again, I entirely agree, Daryl, that is a complexity here, because the salvage has come to an end. The salvage securities should now be collected, and the owners will be under an obligation under the LOF not to release the containers to any of the cargo interests. Now, it's unlikely those cargo interests are going to be trying to collect them in Algeciras anyway, because they're probably bound for onward shipment. So what's also going on here in the background, hopefully in some designated secure area of the terminal, is the inspection of the containers that are damaged, and any transloading of containers if it needs to be done. And then, yes, ideally, once those salvage securities are in place, containers backloaded onto the ship itself and then taken to destination. It may be that the salvage security still hasn't been collected when the container's back on board the ship, but if the owners have entered into, the owners will now are under best endeavours not to release the cargo at this stage to the holes of the bills or the seaway bills. So the owners could arguably continue to exercise that salvage lien as the cargo disappears now onto the next port. I entirely take your point, though, that collecting the GA security, that crystallizes at a different point of time, which will be at the destination port. So that, again, brings into play, yes, some of the administrative burdens that I can see here, where you could have collected salvage securities at port A, but you're still trying to collect your GA ones later on. You end up then footing the bill as the P&I club entirely for holding containers in various different ports, because they're all destined for those different ports on the voyage.
Did anybody else have any further questions as we hit the just about hit the half past mark? Well, no. Well, Kirsten, who has not only been moving around with the microphone, but also has helped very much with the organisation of this event, I just wanted to say a few words on behalf of the YMP.
Well, good morning, everyone, and it was lovely to meet some of you at the entrance. Just a very quick closing remark to say thank you to the LSLC and the YMP, and specifically Aleka Shepherd, the founder thereof. Also to our speakers who provided their informative views on the topic today, as well as the IDRC for hosting, and finally to the attendees both in person and virtually. As a junior within sort of the shipping market, I think these events are really beneficial, both academically and from a social networking perspective to meet and engage with others within the industry from different backgrounds and to share our views and to learn. So we hope to see the virtual attendees at the next LSLC-YMP event. And for those attending in person, we hope you'll join us for a coffee. So thank you very much. And if we can just end with a final applause for all the speakers, that would be much appreciated.